Today's episode is an inspiring and uplifting birth story episode. You will definitely want to hear this. Welcome to the All About Pregnancy and Birth podcast. I'm Dr. Nicole Calloway Rankins, a practicing board-certified OB GYN who's had the privilege of helping hundreds of moms bring their babies into this world. I'm here to help you be knowledgeable, prepared, confident, and empowered to have your best pregnancy and birth. Quick note, this podcast is for educational purposes only, and it's not a substitute for medical advice. Check out the full disclaimer at ncrcoaching.com/disclaimer. Now let's get to it. Well, hello there. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. This is episode number 61. I'm so glad you're spending some time with me today. All right, so today we have a birth story episode, and it's a really inspiring story. Emilee Wilson is a personal trainer, health coach, and a self-proclaimed foodie. She had two sons, almost 7 years apart. She was 19 when she had her first one, and then the second one at 26. And with her first son, she had what she describes as the most unhealthy pregnancy possible. And the pregnancy ended in preeclampsia and a premature baby. Now, with her second son, she turned things around, did things differently, had a very healthy pregnancy where she made health a priority, and she had that son unmedicated, quick birth, and a super fast recovery. Now, her scary, unhealthy pregnancy with her first son led her to find her passion and calling in life as a health coach. And now 10 years later, she has coached over 300 clients, and she is super passionate about helping other women change their lives. So today, Emilee and I talk about exactly what she means when she says her first pregnancy was unhealthy, as well as the pain she still feels today from that birth. We talk about how she was able to have a completely different approach for her second baby, as well as her current pregnancy. She's pregnant with her third baby right now. Also, how she manages the guilt from those different experiences, and then just so much more advice is sprinkled throughout the episode. So I know you will learn a lot. Now, before we get into the episode, at the time this podcast is being released, we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. And if you've listened to this podcast before, then you know I have a free class on how to make your birth plan. Well, I want you to know that I redid the class with some new recommendations regarding making your birth wishes in the midst of coronavirus. You can go to ncrcoaching.com/register to sign up. The class is still on demand, still offered several times a day, and this new version of the class will be there as long as we have the things in place related to coronavirus. The previous version will come back once all this has settled, which it will eventually do. But in the meantime, to give you those updated recommendations, check out the new class at ncrcoaching.com/register. It's totally free. All right, let's get into the episode with Emilee. Thank you so much, Emilee, for agreeing to come on the podcast. You have a really interesting story, and I appreciate you coming on to share it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share it, and hopefully it can be of help to some women out there, either in their pregnancy or, in the future. So I definitely hope it's helpful for them.
Absolutely. So why don't we start off by having you tell us about yourself, your work, and your family?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 30 years old, and I have been a personal trainer, health coach for coming up on 11 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And I've been in the military for almost 8 years as well. I'm married to my husband, Adrian, who's also serves with me, and he is a police officer full time. And then we have two boys, and a third on the way. So we have an almost 11-year-old and then a almost 4-year-old, and then one is in the oven. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh my goodness. And is this third one a boy as well?
Yes, it is. It is.
You are totally outnumbered.
I am officially 100% outnumbered, yes.
And I'm curious, what branch of the military do you serve in?
I am in the Air National Guard, so I do the part-time kind of thing for the Air Force.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So let's start with talking about your first pregnancy. I know you were young at the time, 19. Was this a surprise pregnancy for you?
Oh, yes. I don't know too many people who plan a baby at 19, but yeah, and actually my first son is from a previous marriage. So I married my high school sweetheart and we got pregnant literally I graduated high school in May and then I got pregnant in November of that same
Okay.
year. And I was obviously very young at the time. We got married so that he could join the active duty Marine Corps because we were both like, we're kids. We have nothing to really, take care of a baby right now. So we went that path of getting married so he could join and kind of have a support system there. And, unfortunately that marriage didn't work out, who knew? Uh, so yeah, that was definitely a different experience and not something that we had planned.
Gotcha. So what was well, let me ask you this. You said that pregnancy was unhealthy. That was part of the reason, you wanted to share your story. So what do you mean when you say that pregnancy was unhealthy for you?
I always say that I took full advantage of being pregnant. I thought that it meant you eat whatever you want because you're pregnant. And I was very naive to how much your body changes. So I'm like, whatever happens now, I'm just going to bounce back anyways, whatever, just I really had no idea what I was doing. So I would literally, I remember I sat down one day and I literally ate an entire bag of like 36 pizza rolls. Like I ate them all. Like to this day, I still cannot eat them. But so I overate all of the time and I slept really like 14 to 16 hours a day. I was like a koala. It was
Oh,
crazy. And I packed on all this weight and again I was like, oh, it's because I'm pregnant. That's why. And I ended up putting on, close to 75 pounds before I was even full term. And in 1 month I put on 25 pounds alone. So again, I took full advantage of it. I was 0% active. I didn't care about anything that I ate. And the weight came on with it.
gotcha. So just really, you ate whatever you want, and the choices that you made weren't exactly great.
Yeah. Yeah. It was kind of like I put life on pause while I was pregnant. And I was like, you're pregnant. You can do whatever you want right now. And you're not expected to do anything more.
Okay. Anything else, like any alcohol use or smoking or anything like that?
No, I've always been a square. I'm not really cool. So I didn't dabble in that realm at all. It was really like food was my drug, if you had to
Gotcha.
say anything. So, and I worked
Gotcha.
at Subway at the time. So I got to close every night and, all the sugar cookies, anything left over was on me. So I just took it home and fully
Gotcha.
indulged there.
Okay. So then what was your prenatal care like during that pregnancy?
So at the time, I qualified for, the Medicare or Medicaid. I can't remember. Medicaid.
Medicaid.
That's what it is at the time. And I chose to go to a midwife. And I'd always wanted to use a midwife, probably because my mom had used midwives. I remembered her story. I was actually born at home on purpose. And
Okay.
so it was just kind of in my head to use a midwife. So I went and utilized that through Medicaid. I delivered at our big hospital here. And it was my entire pregnancy, in all honesty, was just pretty much me getting yelled at about my weight. But other than that, it was fairly straightforward, nothing crazy.
Okay. Do you think she was supportive and trying to help you, or was it like chastising, or what do you think?
Um, as older adult now, I look back and see that it was her being, a medical professional and giving me advice I needed. But at the time, I just remember being like super nervous before every appointment because they weighed you every time. And I knew she was going to have a comment to say to me. And I remember having a lot of anxiety around that. But again, as an adult now, I'm like, well, yeah, Emilee, she was doing her job of advising you because I was also very honest with her about what I was eating and like why I was packing it on. So she had very good reason to be talking to me about those things.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Looking back, do you think that there's a way that she could have approached it differently that would have made you, and I know we're going to get to how you chose differently for your subsequent pregnancies, but do you think there was anything that she could have said or done that it would have made you make some changes during that pregnancy?
Probably if it was more of a personal conversation, if that makes sense. It was kind of like looking at the chart, going over the numbers, explaining why it was bad. And maybe if it come from more of like well, why are you eating so much? Well, why is this happening? Well, why do you feel that way? Why are you putting this weight on? Because looking back, I can see that I was terrified to be a mom and where I was at in life. And a lot of it was so emotionally driven. And
Sure.
my relationship wasn't healthy at all. I was terrified about him being a dad to my child. And, maybe if it would just have been more of a personal connection, but, it was, again, just kind of more so going through the numbers in the charts. These numbers are bad and this is why. Let's do better next time. And that was kind of the end of it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So when thinking about getting ready for your birth, and actually let me back up. I really appreciate you saying that because I think sometimes we get sort of focused on just like the numbers without really exploring why that happens. And I think we could go a long way if we kind of think about the why behind it and connect on that more emotional level. So that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, for sure. So when thinking about getting ready for your birth, was there anything that you wanted at all, or were you kind of just going with the flow?
I'd always had in my head that I definitely wanted to try like a natural delivery. And I honestly, at that time, just being so young, I guess I didn't like it's so funny having a baby at 19 and at 30, the difference of it. But I didn't think too much about it. And I was just like, I'm going to try natural. What's the big deal? And it freaked me out to think of something going in my spine. And just in my head, it was honestly like I was excited about it. I was excited to be a mom, as scared as I was also very excited. And so in my head, I was just my water was going to break and I was going to go to the hospital and I was going to have a baby naturally and we were going to live happily ever after. So that was my birth plan anyways.
Gotcha. Did you read any books or anything or take a class or anything like that?
No. Our dog had puppies. She had 10 puppies 2 weeks before I had my son. And I remember like taking her through that birth and I'm like, oh man, I got this. I got experience now. It's a little different, but no, I did absolutely nothing. And we didn't have YouTube even 11 years ago. It wasn't like a big thing to research. And yeah.
Right. I'm trying not to laugh at you, Emilee, but my goodness, you were just kind of sashaying through this thing like, I'm going to just show up and have a baby.
Right. Then that's what it was in my head. And I'm like, girl, this is why you don't have babies at 19. You don't even know what you're doing.
So let's talk about what was your labor and birth like?
Yeah. So I was at 35 weeks and a couple days, and I went to the emergency room, actually, not at my hospital I delivered at, just one closer to me because I was having excruciating pain in like my abdomen. And I went in and they were like, well, at this point, my blood pressure was high, but I was not diagnosed with preeclampsia yet. And they were like, oh, you're just having heartburn. We're going to send you home. And I was like,
okay.
I've had heartburn and this is very different than that, but they sent me home. So I was home for about a day with it. And then I just remember I was at home. It was about 10 or 11 at night. And my husband at the time was playing video games with his friends in the living room. And I was like, look, man, like something is not right. So we went to my hospital that I was meant to deliver at. And we went in and I started getting woozy and the pain was just insane. And they realized that my brain was swelling, my platelets in my liver had quadrupled, and I was about to seize because I was definitely preeclamptic and my blood pressure was through the roof. They were like, all right, we have to induce you now. So
Oh my God. So you had severe like full on HELP syndrome, it sounds like.
yes. And like I said, they didn't even diagnose me until right then and there when I'd gone into that. And so they said, well, I was a day or two shy of 36 weeks. So they were like, weighing the pros and cons, but they were like, we're going to do an amniocentesis to see about the development of the baby's lungs. And we'll kind of go off of there and see what's going on just to prepare for when he came. Well, they diagnosed him as lungs as only 40% developed, but I'd gotten so bad at that point that they were like, we have to do this induction right now. So they ended up, they gave me just about every pain medicine you could have just because it was so severe. And I did end up having an epidural to help with, they gave this all to me for basically my liver pain. That was what was causing such the severe issues. So I ended up having my son, and I was on so many different things, in all honesty. Gosh, it's kind of hard for me to talk about it now even. I don't really remember having him. I was so out of it. And he came out though, and he was 4 pounds, 15 ounces. So he was a little guy, but he only had to do the required 4 hours in the NICU. He was perfectly healthy, just little. So the lung development thing was wrong, thank God. And I was actually unconscious for about 4 days after I had him. And I remember waking up, and my mother-in-law at the time came running in the room, and they're like, oh my gosh, she's awake, she's awake. I was like, what are you talking about? Because in my head, I just had the baby. I didn't realize how much time had passed. And, all the doctors and everybody came in and were like, Emilee, like you had your baby 4 days ago. And I was like, what's going on here? So I remember that being obviously nothing like what I planned. That was very different than my sashaying plan. And I spent about 7, 8 days in the hospital, just getting my blood pressure back down. And, thankfully as with preeclampsia goes, the delivery was the solution. So, he was ready to go before I was, and we just went home after that.
Wow. That is a lot.
Yeah.
That is a lot. So how long did your labor induction take?
It was actually not long at all. It was probably about 5 or 6 hours from when they started the Pitocin, and I pushed about 2 or 3 times, and he was out. So that was my delivery. All in all, was pretty smooth.
Oh wow!
So thankfully,
yeah. Did they say you had anything like a placenta abruption or anything like that, or it was just because sometimes when labor goes that fast, maybe there's some issues with the placenta. I'm just curious.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Thankfully, there was nothing crazy, which is kind of wild considering the rest of the story.
Right.
But yeah, smooth delivery.
Just trying to wrap my head around this. A couple things. Number one, I am so glad that you continued to recognize that something was wrong and you went back to the hospital. Like, number one, because I mean, you really could have had a seizure at home.
Right. Yeah. And, at first I was like, and I think this goes through so many pregnant women's head, like, oh, am I being over dramatic right now? Like, is it really that big? Should I go in? And that's why I'm such a huge advocate of, I don't care what it is. It's better safe than sorry. Go in, get an answer.
Absolutely. Yes. And I'm just curious. I don't just thinking about what they did. I'm not sure why they did an amniocentesis. Like usually we know that babies that are born early, it doesn't, you were sick, you had preeclampsia. Usually we just deliver. So that's just interesting to me that they did an amniocentesis first at 35 weeks to decide about what to do, because it didn't ultimately change anything.
Right. And now where I am at, I look back because I didn't even know what an amnio. They're like, you have to do this test. I was like, okay, like, and then you learn the complications that come with it too at the time. And I know they're very small, but none of that was even explained to me. And I'm like, like that all just seemed kind of weird now. That I know more about it, looking back on it.
Right. That just must have been incredibly. I mean, how did you feel after that? Like disoriented, sad, confused after the delivery? I mean, I can imagine you just went through a lot of emotions.
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, everything that hit me, like everyone was worried about me and my health, but I wasn't even thinking about that. I was like, I didn't get to change my baby's first diaper. Like,
Mm,
I'm not the one who did that. I barely remember having him. Like, I didn't get that. The moment I was looking forward to more than anything was the moment I had my baby and they handed him to me and I got to look at him. And it's like, they did that and I did, but I barely remember. I even see pictures of it. I had people take pictures of it happening and I look back and I'm like, I don't remember that moment. And that is to this day still what, drives me. And it was the main thing that I was even concerned about at the moment.
right, right. Wow, wow. So then let's talk about then going into your next pregnancy. How did all of that affect how you approached things the next time around?
Yeah. I mean, I get up on my soapbox about it, but I'll tell you
No,
what.
yeah, yeah, let's hear it.
It's the night and day difference, and it wasn't even, just approaching my next pregnancy, it was my life. The day we got home from the hospital with my oldest son, it wasn't about, "Oh, I'm gonna lose this baby weight and look good again." It was, "Listen, we're gonna be healthy. I'm gonna show you what healthy means, what it looks like. I owe this to you. It's a miracle that you're safe." And it felt like a second chance at life to me. Like, I was never an athletic person. I played sports, but I was the weirdo. Like, health was never a thing on my mind. So I lost, my weight and I got healthy. And then by the time I had my second son, because, they're about 7 years apart, that's just who I was. So with my second son, it was night and day, like never a single issue. And they told me after Gabriel, my oldest son, they're like, you're gonna have blood pressure issues the rest of your life. And then with my second pregnancy, they were like, oh my gosh, that was so bad. Like, we want you on the baby aspirin off day one with this. And it's not like I was trying to go against my doctor, obviously, but I never had one single issue with blood pressure. I was working out, not working out, but I was active 3 days after I had him. I had a completely natural birth. I remember every single second. I felt amazing. And it was night and day. Absolutely.
Right. So, we talked about how on one hand, you were kind of naive in the way that you approached pregnancy, but my gosh, this realization that you came to afterwards is incredibly powerful and not something at 19 that a lot of folks older and more experienced or however you want to say it than you come to. So I think it's really, I don't know. It's just very admirable that it caused you to really take a whole different approach to your life.
Oh gosh. Thank you. I appreciate that. And, also as a young mom, you obviously get a lot of judgment and criticism and wow, way to ruin your life, blah, blah, blah. But I believe everything happens for a reason, whatever anybody else believes in. And I always look at my son as like, you're the one who saved me. You're the one who are why I do what I do today and why I take care of myself the way that I do. So he was my driving force behind everything, that's for sure.
Gotcha. And then so that led you to, did you go get training? Is that when you became a health coach? Did you get training as a health coach or did you just, that sort of slowly build over time?
So here's what's kind of funny is, I'm sorry, I feel like I have a million stories.
No,
Um,
we love it. Yeah.
so at the time, actually one of my really close friends in high school, she had a baby a couple months just before I did. So we were the same age, pregnant at the same time. And she actually gained 100 pounds after she had her daughter.
Oh,
And I'll never forget this day. we were at her apartment hanging out. The kiddos were playing. And at the time, they were about one, a little over one. I'd already lost my weight. I wasn't coaching anyone. I was just taking care of myself. And we're sitting there and she's eating a bag of hot Cheetos. And she was like, Emilee, you have to help me. Like, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. And I was like, absolutely. And literally starting the next day, we went to the gym together every single day. I just showed her what I was doing. And in 10 months, she lost 130 pounds. And I didn't just see, she lost weight and had confidence. Like, I saw her life change, everything. And that was my moment of like, this is amazing. Like, nothing felt so good as to help her. But what's kind of even crazy after that is I still wasn't like, oh, Emilee, you should be a trainer. For the next 3 years, I coached people completely for free, whoever wanted it, whenever, wherever. And just because I thought it was a hobby.
Emilee's out here giving away all her best stuff.
Step in line. Why not?
Right.
So I did that forever. And then I was like, wait, isn't this
Maybe I should get paid for this?
Yeah, isn't this what people like charge people for? I'm confused. What am I doing here? So then I started the process of looking at what it took to get certified. But then I had those gremlins, like I know a lot of us do, of like, who do you think you are?
Yes.
You don't have any formal training. Why would anyone listen to you? And, at the time I was, 22. I was like, who's going to listen to a 22-year-old about this, whatever? And then my dad passed away from very health reasons that are all preventable. He was a self-induced type 2 diabetic, blah, blah, blah. And that was my real thing where I was like, all right, man, time to stop messing around. You need to help people. You need to save them. Like, not save them, but be the support system that helps them save themselves. And that was when everything became real for my full-time, focus and gig and certification and all that good stuff.
Gotcha. So it's so amazing to me how much pregnancy and birth for many women is just such a life changer in so many ways.
Oh, yeah. And it's so different than what you think it's going to be. It's nothing like as prepared as much advice, whatever, how much you think you know yourself. You're never prepared until you're in it.
Right. Exactly. So let's get back then to talk about number 2. So number 2, it sounds like you were ready this time. Did you go with a midwife again?
I did. Yep. I did stick with the midwife route, a different one than I went to previously. So my prenatal care for that was the same thing. I had well, actually, my second pregnancy, in all honesty, the thing with technology is it can really make you worry about things. Like I did the genetic screening and all this stuff, and I got put through kind of the ringer of like, your son is very high risk for this trisomy 18, and I had to do the maternal fetal medicine route. And then he was measuring small my whole pregnancy. And so they were like, you were worried the blood isn't going to the placenta to feed him. And I actually ended up getting induced with him as well at 37 weeks because he'd fallen below the 5th percentile on his size on the ultrasound. But I was induced and I had him, aside from the induction, I had him naturally. And he came out and he was 5 pounds, 7 ounces and perfectly healthy. So It was kind of just inaccurate information coming from the prenatal care side of things on maternal fetal medicine, but it's almost like unavoidable stuff when you do all this testing, So he was perfectly healthy.
Yeah, and that's always tough. I'll say from our side, we do the best. Let me back up. So you can definitely go down a rabbit hole with testing for things. I think part of the things that we don't do a good enough job of is explaining the implications of the results, and then like telling women like we can test for these things, but what are we going to do with the information afterwards? And then for the growth piece, ultrasound can be off. So, it's always tough sometimes. We give the best information that we can. Obviously, in your case, things turned out great. And that's what we want. But I can certainly see how that you look back and it's like, wait a minute, everything actually, ended up being fine. And I can imagine how stressful that was going through that at the time.
Yeah, and I definitely keep an open mind to it. I know at the end of the day, everyone's trying to give their best piece of advice on things and help you as the best they can. And it's almost kind of ironic we're having this conversation because just this previous week, well, I went in for my 20-week anatomy scan a couple weeks ago, and they'd found an echogenic intracardiac focus in this baby. So,
Yeah, which 99% of the time ends up being nothing.
yes, absolutely. And but then they sprinkle in there, or it's linked to Down syndrome. So, and this is something that I've noticed just from my last son to this one, in the conversation that's happening is they throw this at you and they say, but don't worry about it. It's usually nothing. Don't Google
Right.
it. So
Right.
what are you really gonna do? And
Go run and Google.
right, right. And I went to maternal fetal medicine and they did the more in-depth scan just a couple days ago. He looks great, got, as best they could clearance on all that stuff. But it was 10 days in between that doctor visit of, hey, this is going on, to the more in-depth one where you get more answers. And something that a gap that, and like, this is obviously something that is not simple to do at all. And I know it's just a process, but of like that conversation to you getting more answers. Because what I found, because of course I went online and saw the conversations about other people who had this because I'd never heard of it, was, I had a month, I had 6 weeks in between being told that this was going on to getting more answers. And you can almost drive yourself crazy in that time frame of overthinking things. So that was just one thing that I had in my head, and it's not something personal against anybody in healthcare. Like I get it's a process, but I wish there was more of a system for the moms who are told these things to, not have that time to go crazy for weeks on end.
Yeah, exactly. That's really important. I really think we in medicine don't really appreciate or understand some of those things. Like, we should either like try to expedite as best we can for things to get, an answer quicker, or just acknowledge. Maybe, do you think it would have been helpful to say, like, I know in the meantime that it's going to be hard not to Google, and that waiting can be very stressful, or just acknowledging that it's going to come, and maybe some strategies to deal with it in the meantime. I know it's a tough thing.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great idea, and to just share as much information about it. Don't just give someone a pamphlet on what it is or just an idea. And looking back, I'm seeing an OB this round, and she seems so not worried about it because, just as you said, it usually ends up being so. I'm sure she's seen it a million times.
Right.
So
But you've seen it once.
right,
Like,
right. So she's like, yeah, whatever. And she was like, I've never seen this actually be it. So I'm sure in her head, again, she wasn't worried at all. And that honestly did make me feel better, though, the fact that she wasn't like, oh, it could be a million things. But just like what you said, it'd be helpful just to hear, like, I know this is going to be stressful. We're going to get you in as soon as we can. What more are you going to say?
yeah. 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 So you've had a quite a range of experiences with all three of your pregnancies.
Yeah. Very interesting. That is for sure.
Oh, and I forgot to say, you said with the second one, you ended up having a completely unmedicated birth, even while being induced. So how long did the induction take? And because a lot of times folks say labor induction with medications is more painful than, not having medications for induction. And then, did you do anything to prepare for birth that second time around? And are you in the same for the third one? I just threw like 5 questions at you at once.
I got him. I will not let my pregnancy brain get in the way here. So my second induction went really great as well. Honestly, I know there's a lot of people who don't do so well, but my induction took about, again, 6 hours from getting the Pitocin to delivering my son. And
Wow.
yeah, very quick, very quick. I will say, though, just being in so much better physical condition, my recovery was a million times smoother with my second son. So I had him, like I said, naturally aside from the Pitocin, and, it hurt obviously, but probably helped that he was smaller too. But my recovery was so much better and clearer, and, I got to spend I kept it with me the whole night and all that good stuff. So, that was great. And then with this upcoming one, I kind of
Oh, and I'm sorry. Did you take any classes or anything or read books the second time around?
um No,
Okay.
I guess I survived the first one, so I was like, "Oh, I'll just do this again." I mean, obviously, I'm in,
Right.
like, a ton of, mom groups, and
Sure.
I will say that I put a lot more effort into finding out about fitness during pregnancy.
Okay.
So, that wasn't something I was I knew about it, but I put a lot of effort into, fitness during pregnancy and keeping it safe and postpartum and all that good stuff.
Gotcha. And then so how then were you thinking you were going to manage the pain? Were you just like, your fitness you were hoping would translate, which it sounds like it did, but had you thought about how specifically you were going to manage the pain?
You know, I guess I just had the mindset of this sounds ridiculous, but, like, women used to have babies in fields and get right back to work, like, I'm at least gonna be in a nice soft bed, like, I know it's gonna hurt, but,
Right,
um
right.
and, like, it wasn't 'cause I was trying to be again, it's not like I'm trying to be a hero and have a natural birth, I'm not against utilizing medication at all
Mhm,
if that's the
mhm.
route you choose. Uh, it just really freaks me out to think of a needle going in my spine, like, I really
Gotcha.
don't like that idea.
You'd be surprised a lot of women actually feel that way.
Really? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
I believe it, I believe it. So, I was just like, "I know that it will end eventually, so we'll just get through it."
Gotcha, gotcha. And so this time around, things are going other than this little snafu with the intra I can't even get it out. The cardiac focus. How are things going this time and are you approaching things any differently this time?
Yeah, this time things are, yeah, aside from that, smooth sailing. And I would just say that I'm really looking a lot more into my postpartum care better than I did with my last son. Like, this is my 3rd child. We have 2 other kids to worry about. Like, this is why I switched to an OB. My hospital's a lot closer than the one I delivered at before. It's 15 minutes right down the road. We live in the middle of nowhere, so it's hard to get places. And we're just looking at we've even talked about scheduling an induction with this baby, like, when I can at 39 weeks because and I know not everybody would agree with this, but my husband's family lives out of town, like, we don't have a lot of help. He's
Yeah,
a
no, that's not unreasonable at all.
Yeah, and with our other kids and animals, he's a police officer, and they actually expect you to get your vacation time in for this ahead of time, like, when a baby's gonna come, so it's almost like planning it out. I'm just really focusing on the postpartum piece of this. Both my kids will be on summer break, so all 3 are gonna be home when I'm immediately postpartum, so,
Right.
that's one of the biggest things I would say is different with this one is the planning I'm trying to do.
Gotcha. And I did want to ask, how are things different between having a midwife and an OB? Do you notice any differences? I'm curious.
So far, honestly, not too much. I've only met with my OB 2 times so far. I was with a nurse practitioner my first couple appointments, but I will say that at this point, there's really not too much of a difference in my care. I don't know if that'll be different when I actually go to deliver, but I should also mention when I delivered my first son that my midwife actually was not the one who delivered him,
Okay.
because I had an
You were
on-call.
high risk and
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so that was
Okay.
different.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Now, just to wrap up, I'm curious about, do you feel any guilt about your first pregnancy and how you've managed that, if you feel any guilt about the differences in the way you approached your pregnancies?
Oh, yeah, like I said, I get choked up just to this day thinking about it. Like, I definitely can look back at my first pregnancy and feel a bunch of guilt over that. And I can say, you're a bad person. You missed out on this. You endangered him that. Or I can choose to look at the big picture of what came out of it. I never would have been a trainer. I never would take care of myself as much. I would never value health as much if I hadn't gone through all of that, and at such a young age as well. And I can choose to look at that way and appreciate what came out of it. And for any mom who's maybe feeling guilt over a choice they're making during pregnancy or made in the past, just know that you're allowed to be human and make mistakes, and you can choose to grow through those mistakes. And they're all just learning lessons at the end of the day. So it's a choice you got to make on how you're going to look at things. And again, looking at the big picture of what's really important here. He's healthy, he's fine, and so am I because of him.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is obviously like, one of the questions I had written down to ask ahead of time was, how has this affected your work? And I think that's in every single way it's affected what you do today.
Oh yeah, I would not, awkward Emilee in I think just about anyone in high school that knew me would be so surprised that, I turned out to be a trainer. I don't think anyone saw that coming, not even myself.
Right.
And at this point, I've coached over 300 people, and I look at
wow.
It's not like I'm the one changing their lives, but I'm helping them change their own life. And that came from him. It's really incredible.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed. So last question, if you had to choose your favorite piece of advice to give to other women as they go through pregnancy and get ready for their birth, what would that be?
I would say to have no expectations of yourself, as hard as that sounds.
Oh, wow.
But just how much your body's going to change and how it's never going to be the same, but your entire life's going to be that way. And just let it be what it's supposed to, because it's a miracle to create a life. And I think in today's society, we forget that. It is a true miracle to create a human being. And then it's a miracle to raise them and get to have a connection with somebody like that. So just don't have an expectation of what it's supposed to look like. Don't let other people influence how you choose to go through things, and just let this be your own miracle and look however you need it to.
I love that. I love that. So where can women connect with you if they're interested in learning more about what you do? Where can women find you?
Oh, yeah. So you can go on Instagram. It's just Emilee Wilson Health, and Emilee is Emilee, a little weird. And then Facebook page, I have the same thing, Emilee Wilson Health. Share a bunch of stuff on those things. And then I also have a podcast. It's called the Love Yourself Naked Podcast. And I talk all things fitness, nutrition, mindset, life. My cat, I call him my co-host because he's always meowing in the bathroom or the background. It's not as professional as this. So they can find me any of those places and send me a message.
Yeah, I love it. I will link to all of that in the show notes for sure. Well, thank you so much, Emilee, for coming on. You have a really inspiring story, and I appreciate you taking the time to share it with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Nicole. Appreciate it.
All right. So wasn't that a great episode? After every episode, when I have a guest on, I do something called Nicole's Notes, where I talk about my top 3 or 4 takeaways from the episode. And there were so many things that struck me about this episode that it was hard for me to choose just a few points for Nicole's Notes, but here we go. All right. Number 1, Emilee talked about how with her first pregnancy, she was on Medicaid, which is insurance for low-income women. And she talked about how her midwife chastised her about her weight instead of really helping her with her weight. And I'm not talking about the midwife in specific, in particular, I don't know her, but I do know that low income women and young women can be at risk for being mistreated during pregnancy and birth. People can often make judgments. I am probably guilty of doing that myself in the earlier days of my career. But to be clear, everyone deserves the same level of respect and care. So if you feel like you're being mistreated because you're young or because you're on Medicaid, and by the way, Medicaid covers 40% of births in this country. So there are lots of women who utilize Medicaid for their birth. If you feel like you're being mistreated, then bring it up or find another more supportive provider. And also, I would say if you work in the healthcare field and you see women, if you're a nurse, because I know I have nurses who listen, doulas who listen. If you work in the healthcare field and you see this sort of disrespect happening, then call it out if you feel comfortable doing so, because that is how culture changes. All right, number 2, Emilee is a lovely woman, but let me tell you that her approach of not really doing anything to prepare for birth does not work for most women. I have seen a handful of women in my nearly 15 years of doing this who can just pop in and have an unmedicated birth without preparing ahead of time. If you don't prepare ahead of time, you are way more likely to get overwhelmed and ask for pain medication, especially in the hospital. So I suggest for sure you read a book or take a course so that you can prepare. Of course, the birth preparation course, my online childbirth education course, has tons of information to help you with an unmedicated birth, including an entire lesson for women who want to do an unmedicated hospital birth specifically. So you can check out the birth preparation course at ncrcoaching.com/enroll. Now, number 3, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Listen to your body. If something is not right, then go in. Emilee listened, even though they sent her home the first time, things weren't getting better. She still wasn't feeling well. She went back the second time, and that's when she was diagnosed with severe preeclampsia and HELLP syndrome. It can be the difference between life and death, literally. So you must, if you have things or you have that feeling, something's telling you that something's not right, then go back, get answers until you find an answer that you are satisfied with. And then the final thing I will say is there is always an opportunity to make a new choice. And Emilee is a perfect example of that. So give yourself some grace. Know that we all make mistakes in life. We all do things that we wish we would have done differently. But every moment, every minute, every day is an opportunity to make a new choice. You can make new choices and do things differently going forward. All right, so that is it for this episode of the podcast. And speaking of new choices, who's going to make a new choice regarding how you approach your pregnancy as a result of hearing Emilee's inspiring story? Who's going to eat differently? Who's going to move your body more? Let me know in the All About Pregnancy and Birth Facebook group. This is a great group of supportive women. It's over 600 women in the group at the time that I've recorded this. And I'm in the group as well. And the community manager, Keisha, who's a doula, is in the group. But the best part of the group is the pregnant women for sure. Just a really supportive and helpful community. So let me know in the group if you are going to make some new choices about how you approach your pregnancy. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast in Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts like Spotify. And please leave me a review in Apple Podcast in particular. Number 1, I love hearing what you say about the show. Number 2, it helps the show to grow, helps other women find the show. And number 3, I give shout outs on episodes to folks who leave me reviews. So leave me an honest review in Apple Podcast. I so appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Now, next week on the podcast, we have a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. It is going to be an amazing episode. So do come on back next week. And until then, I wish you a healthy and happy pregnancy and birth. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the All About Pregnancy and Birth podcast. Head to my website, ncrcoaching.com, to get even more great info, including free downloadable resources on how to manage pain in labor and warning signs to look out for after birth. You'll also find information on my free online class on how to make a birth plan, as well as everything you need to know about the birth preparation course. Again, that's ncrcoaching.com, and I will see you next week.